Okay, everybody, without further delay, if people start to arrive, we may take the opportunity to test their sound so that the discussion afterward is functional, because it can cause problems and create some confusion with speaker feedback. So welcome, everyone. This webinar will be recorded and it will be shared through the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network website. And so today we have an hour together and we're discussing governing housing cooperatives' recent findings. These are two related research projects in the realm of housing cooperative governments, exploring learning, skill building, social ties, and the development as individuals serve on the board of directors and engage in other ways their housing cooperatives, and engagement of young members in their housing cooperatives. My name is Brendan Denovan from the Communications Manager at Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, and I just want to take a moment to explain the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network. The research network is a pan-Canadian network of researchers, students, and co-op practitioners. There are 4 research clusters across Canada who organize the various projects locally. The network is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, which provided funding in 2010 for this project, and it runs until March 2015. The network is engaged in research and that explores the impacts of cooperatives in their communities, be they social, economic, or environmental. The participants in this webinar will be invited to ask questions or provide comments after each of the 2 presentations, so we'll have an interlude after the first one so that we can have a discussion. I will now just quickly introduce our speakers. And I don't seem to have control of, I will quickly introduce the speakers. Catherine Leviten-Reid is an assistant professor in the MBA in Community Economic Development program at Cape Breton University, and she does research on organizational form, housing, social care, and governance. And of course, the second speaker would be Justin Ellerby, who has lived and worked and served as a board officer for California Housing Cooperatives for 11 years. He served as the president of both the binational North American Students Cooperation and also of the Davis, California-based Solar Community Housing Association. He is currently pursuing an MBA in Community Economic Development at Cape Breton University in Nova Scotia. So without further ado, we're going to hand over the screen control here to Catherine Leviten-Reid to begin her presentation, and I will now mute myself. So thank you for coming today.
Could we just do a round of introductions? I'd like to know who is listening to the webinar, if possible.
Yeah, it's Doug Potentier. I'm sitting in Victoria, and I'm on the board of directors with Federated Cooperatives Limited based in Saskatoon. So really not directly involved with any of the housing cooperatives, but because of my involvement with the BC Cooperatives Association and, well, PMC, was interested to just hear what the latest is on governance issues facing the housing cooperatives. So just a general interest in it.
Emily, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Emily Doyle. I'm from CHF Canada. I am a recent hire, so I wasn't around when the initial research took place, but I'm very interested to hear the findings. Young member engagement is an interest of mine, so yeah, looking forward to hearing the findings.
Thank you. And Troy?
Oh, great. Hi, my name is Troy Dixon. I am the Co-op Development and Membership Intern at the Ontario Cooperative Association based in Guelph, and I'm doing a socio-economic impact study of the cooperative sector in Guelph, including the housing co-ops, and we found that there's over 1,100 people who live in cooperative housing in Guelph, including 550 adults, 400 children, and over 165 students. So I'm hoping to learn as much information as I can today about housing co-ops in general.
Thank you. And Amitava, can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I am Amitava. I'm basically a professor of research methods, and I'm interested in listening to you. And I've been a professor for last 40 years in research methods, and a very active student of cooperatives. So I'll be listening to you very keenly and learning from you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, great. And I'm really hoping for those of you, such as Doug, not in the housing co-op sector, you will find what we're presenting today very applicable to other cooperatives as well. In any case, let me get started here. Just don't seem to have control over my PowerPoint because I can't do page down. Hang on a second.
Try clicking on it again. Click.
Oh, okay. So previous. Sorry, folks. Just hang on a second. Okay, perfect. Okay. So what is the research about that I'm presenting on today? I'm asking if people benefit when they're involved in their housing co-ops. And I'm looking at 3 kinds of involvement in housing co-ops, being on the board of directors, helping with operational tasks like maintenance work or office work, and planning social events. And by whether or not people benefit, I'm looking at 3 different ways that they could be affected through their involvement in their housing co-ops. So I'm looking at whether people develop their capabilities, and this includes whether or not they report they develop financial skills, operational skills, organizational experience, skills in working with others, as well as self-confidence. I'm also looking at whether or not people report that they develop social ties. So do people say that they're gaining friends and developing stronger personal supports? And I'm also looking at whether or not involvement affects the ability of members of cooperatives to influence decisions over the housing in which they're living. So I'm looking also at whether or not there are differing effects of involvement. And so what do I mean by this? I mean, okay, so if you're on the board of directors of your housing co-op, is that going to benefit you differently than being involved, for example, in operational tasks in your housing co-op or planning social events? So before I share the results with you, I'll talk a little bit about the literature too. I just want us together to just discuss for a minute what we think I will report on in a few minutes. So typically when we start a research project, we have our own hunches, our hypotheses that are rooted in the existing literature, but they can also be rooted in our own experiences. So just throwing that out there to the group. So do you think that being involved in a housing co-op benefits members? If you want to, you can draw on your own experience here, and it doesn't have to be experience being involved in housing co-ops if you've been involved in a food co-op or another kind of co-op, for example. So I'm opening that up for some thoughts.
And I just encourage folks from the audience to use the raise hand button, if you can see it in the control panel, if you'd like to respond. So, there you are, Troy. Excellent. Way to go. You're on.
Okay. Right. So as part of my study, I have interviewed some coordinators of housing co-ops in Guelph, and one beneficial aspect that they did mention that members get from participating in the housing co-op is by taking part in committees and developing skill sets, they were able to put this on their resume, and in turn, several members of one co-op in Guelph, the members were able to get jobs as a result of the experience that they gained by taking part in the housing co-op. So there seem to be long-term benefits vis-a-vis the resume and job prospects being improved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Someone else must have a thought. Aha, Doug. You're on.
Okay, yeah, Doug Potentier. The answer I would say is yes, and the experience is just observing other people running their cooperatives, finding out a little bit about them and their backgrounds, and they've moved along to then being active participants, say at BC Cooperatives Association, ultimately ending up on even the boards of CMC, or being the regional representative sitting on the Co-operators company.
Right.
So a definite yes there, just based on observations.
Right.
Thank you.
And do you think, so on to the second question, so it sounds like there's a feeling that yes, absolutely, being involved does benefit members. Do you think it matters what kind of work you do in a cooperative? So is being on the board of directors going to affect you differently compared to, say, being involved in operational tasks or planning social events? It's okay if there are no hunches out there. I had one, so. So my hunch starting is that it was going to matter what kind of engagement there was. So it was going to matter if you were on the board versus, say, helping with operational tasks. And being on the board was going to lead to greater benefits for members. So just moving on to the literature, there's really a rich literature on the benefits of being involved in associations. So there's the literature very consistently shows that if you are involved in an association, your well-being is going to increase. So you might experience greater physical health, and you might report greater happiness. Volunteering fosters social connections. So if you get involved with an association, you develop friendships, and so there are people with whom you can go out for dinner after you finish your afternoon commitment in the association that you're volunteering for. Or you might develop friendships where you can actually rely on people if something goes wrong in your life, like you need some money or you need someone to care for a relative for a few hours. And volunteering, according to the literature, also does build people's capabilities. People report that they develop job-related skills as well as civic skills. But there are gaps in this literature. So a serious gap is actually that volunteering tends to be captured through a yes-no variable. So people are asked, do you volunteer, yes or no? And then how does that relate to their increased well-being or their, the number of friends that they have. So this literature is not looking at what kinds of tasks people take on in the associations in which they are volunteering. Some of the literature also looks at the amount of time, so volunteering for 5 hours a month versus volunteering for 30 hours a month, and how that matters. But again, there isn't much at all on specific tasks. So, so this research is making a contribution in that respect. And for the most part, this literature is based on participation in nonprofit organizations and not cooperatives. So how did I do this research? I used an existing data set that was provided to me by CHF. This was called the Co-op Housing Programs Evaluation. That was conducted a little bit over a decade ago by CMHC, but CHF was a partner in that project. And this data set includes 221 co-ops that were randomly selected across the country, and then 2,410 members of these co-ops who were also randomly selected. So this was pretty nice because this means that the findings are generalizable to the population of housing co-ops in the country, and it's pretty unusual for co-op researchers to be able to use data sets where the results are generalizable. Typically there's no existing data, and we tend to do case studies with limited generalizability. So this was really truly a gift that was provided by CHF to do this project. And the survey participants were asked if someone in their household had participated in the housing co-op and how, and they were also asked to speak about the perceived benefits related to their involvement. And I analyzed the data using something called logistic regression. And logistic regression allows you to look at the relationship between two variables while taking other variables into account. So what is the relationship then between doing some kind of volunteer work in the cooperative and the outcome that people are reporting? So, but taking into account other variables. So I considered the length of time people had been in their housing, whether or not the household fell below the low-income cutoff, whether there was a member of a visible minority group in the household, as well as the size of the community in which the housing co-op was located. So just to share with you some characteristics of my sample with you. Here you see the length of time in the housing. So most of the participants had been there between either 2 and 7 years or greater than 7 years. About half were living below the low-income cutoff. About 11% indicated that there was a member of a visible minority group in the household. And then here you see the size of the community. So about half of them are coming from larger communities. And then you see that about 50% of the participants said that they had, or someone in their household had served on the board. 66% indicated that they or someone in the household helped with operational tasks, and 45% said the same for social events. So what did I find? So as far as participation in operational tasks, do members benefit? They do. They do benefit. According to the results, they said that they gained organizational experience. So in parentheses, you have, it gives you the magnitude. So there was a 25% greater odds of reporting that someone had gained organizational experience if they participated in operational tasks versus if they didn't. You see with financial skills, they gained those. They were 100%, there was 110% greater odds. Individuals indicated they gained operational skills, which was the strongest, and also an ability to influence decisions over the housing in which they were living. Do they benefit when they participate in planning social events? Yes, they do. They indicated that they gained organizational experience, financial skills, operational skills, skills in working with others, self-confidence, friendships, and an ability to influence decisions over the housing in which they live. And you can see that the organizational experience really had the highest odds of being reported. And then do members benefit when they're on the board of directors? Yes, they do benefit. So here you have people saying that they gained organizational experience, financial skills, operational skills, skills in working with others, self-confidence, friends and personal support, and an ability to influence decisions over the housing in which they were living. And you see with participating on the boards, organizational experience had the greatest odds of being reported, followed by financial skills and operational skills. So recall that the second question I had when I started this research is whether or not members gain more from being involved in certain tasks. So does it matter if you're on the board of directors, for example, versus planning social events? And the answer to that question really is yes. So financial skills, organizational experience, skills in working with others, and self-confidence had the highest odds of being experienced if a person was on the board of directors. Gaining an ability to influence decisions over housing also had the strongest odds of being reported if you were on the board. Operational skills was an exception, so that had the highest odds of being experienced if one was engaged in operational activities. And then gaining friends and a stronger support network was most likely to be experienced if a member was involved in organizing social events. So what does this mean? So what do I think that these results mean? What do I want you to think about? What do I want you to take away from this webinar? Well, this is what I'm putting forward. I think that, so this research finds that being involved in operational tasks in a housing co-op leads to fewer outcomes, but it still does matter in terms of developing members' capabilities and their sense that they can influence decisions over the housing in which they live. And I think this is important to consider as co-ops think about reducing the amount of member involvement in day-to-day aspects of their associations. So CHF Canada might be thinking about this, about really focusing on the role of their members in the governance of their cooperatives and less so on in the day-to-day tasks. Broadening this out now beyond housing co-ops, I know with food co-ops in the United States, even though they started in the 1970s relying heavily on member involvement in the day-to-day, like stocking shelves, cleaning the stores, working at the checkout, that has basically disappeared. So there are only 2 food co-ops in the U.S. that involve their members in the day-to-day. And so what are the implications of that? Because people still are able to develop their capabilities when being involved in day-to-day tasks. And I also think that engaging members through things like planning social events also shouldn't be dismissed or overlooked. Again, because members do gain. And so again, broadening this out a bit, I'm thinking about a book that I read last year. I'm not sure if anyone has read it. I recommend it, by Marty Donkervoort, and it's called Inner City Renovation, and it's about a social enterprise in inner city Winnipeg. And the social enterprise does home renovations, but also new builds. And initially when the social enterprise was established, the idea was that it would become worker-owned. But the organizers realized that the workers actually weren't interested in ownership. They weren't interested in governance, and they were really disappointed by that. But what they found was that their workers were very interested in the social aspects of the business. And so, this suggests that, well, you can engage your members in that way, and they will develop capabilities. But I guess if your goal really is to maximize the development of people's capabilities, then the results here do suggest that it's through board involvement that you're going to do that, which shouldn't be surprising. So a couple more points, and then I'm done. These findings do show, too, that the co-op model of housing does foster a sense of ability to influence the housing in which one lives, particularly when people are on the board. So Emily perhaps can speak to this better than I can, but when housing co-ops were put forward as a model about 40 years ago, it was in part in response to what many people considered to be a failed experiment in public housing. People were disenfranchised in public housing. So the co-op model allowed people to govern the housing in which they lived, and through that, develop a sense of that it was their housing. People were empowered, and so this does show that indeed, by being on the board of directors, there is a sense of ability to influence the housing that is fostered. And finally, this research does contribute to our knowledge in the co-op sector, specifically about how getting involved in co-ops leads to outcomes, including learning and skills development. We often hear this. You see this in the literature everywhere. Co-ops allow people to get involved and learn and develop skills. I have a column coming out in the local newspaper tomorrow about the closure of our food co-op, unfortunately, and I write that co-ops still have a future in Cape Breton, and they allow people to learn, right? If you say this in the blueprint for a cooperative decade, that when people are engaged in their cooperatives, they're allowed to learn. But really, we don't have a lot of material out there that actually substantiates that. And so I do hope that this research project makes a contribution in that way. So that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to open it up for questions, but I'm just going to ask that Catherine switch the holding slide perhaps right away over to Justin's presentation. Okay, so I think if anyone has questions, the idea of putting up your hand might be the easiest to manage rather than unmuting anybody. Is there any follow-up questions to Catherine's presentation? Amitava, I will unmute you now, and you're unmuted.
Okay, and there's one question is regarding the methodology, as I was interested in that. I can understand the universe that was taken, and I really want to know the universe and how the sampling was designed. It is random sampling, I believe, of course, as said, but how did you select the 221 cooperatives? And out of 21, how did you select the 2,410 respondents? What was the basic methodology? And were there any bias there?
Well, thanks for that. So this research was designed by the folks involved in the evaluation that took place in 2001, 2002. So that's CMHC, and the CHF was a partner in that. So as far as the sampling frame that they used, they had a list of all housing co-ops in Canada that they put together based on lists that CMHC has, and they were compared to any list that existed in the provinces. And so a sampling frame was put together that way, and then there was a random selection that was done of the housing co-ops. They compared the list of housing co-ops to the population, and they determined that it was representative as far, so there was a goodness of fit. So it was representative as far as part of the country, as well as community size. And then as far as selecting the members of the housing co-ops that participated provided complete lists of their members, and then the research team made a random selection based on those based on that list, and then they did follow-ups to non-respondents by phone or by mail, depending on what kind of contact information they had.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Amitava. Emily Doyle, I'm going to unmute you now. Go ahead, Emily, you're unmuted.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect, good. I might have missed this. My sound was going in and out. But what barriers did you find, or did you find any barriers for young members in terms of joining the board, getting involved? Did they speak to that at all?
Emily, that's coming up in Justin's presentation.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, there were no questions asked in this evaluation that was done about barriers to engagement.
Okay, are there any other questions before we move on to the second presentation, young members' involvement in cooperative governance of housing co-ops? Troy, you are unmuted.
Thanks. Hi. I'm just wondering if anything came up in your research around services. For example, here there's a cost-cutting program where the members can buy services in bulk, And also there's collaboration that's taking place with transportation car sharing co-ops, which is another service that's being integrated into the programming. So I was wondering how this came up, and if this came up in the research at all. Thank you.
No, Troy, it didn't. This survey also didn't collect any data on services that were being provided by housing cooperatives, and so I don't have any information on that. But it's an interesting question as far as how housing organizations in the third sector in general, I think, so zero equity co-ops, but also nonprofit housing, adopt a housing plus services philosophy. I have seen technical reports from the United States that look at third sector housing providers compared to for-profits, and indeed third sector housing organizations are providing services like childcare or perhaps employment training. So there is some. If you're looking for evidence, there is some evidence out there. It's in technical reports on how third sector housing organizations are doing that, but it's not related to this research project.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to put Eric on. Eric, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Eric.
We haven't checked Eric's sound yet. Eric, can you, do you have a microphone?
Me yet?
Yeah, you're there.
Are you hearing me now?
I am.
Okay. Mike, I apologize too because my audio was coming in and out. Did the research have any questions on it, explore the possibilities of the co-op participants' integration into the wider community? One of the things that I've always given a lot of benefit to housing co-ops and other co-ops is that they people of various economic backgrounds can come together and learn from each other. But not only that, but they can get better integrated into the community. So people who had less opportunities to rub shoulders with other parts of the community, the co-ops give them that opportunity. Did this research get into that at all?
Well, first of all, hi, Eric. I'm glad you're here. No, not at all. And I when I was presenting earlier, I was talking about how having this data set was a gift, but you're asking really rich questions about engagement, kind of more broadly understood, and a richer set of benefits. And unfortunately, no, that question wasn't asked at all.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I think at this point we're going to move forward with Justin Ellerby's presentation, and his screen is now showing. Just want to make sure that his slideshow is working. It looks fine. Are you there, Justin?
Yes, I am. Can you guys hear me loud and clear?
I can.
Fantastic. Well, great. Thanks everyone for checking out this second half of the webinar here. So just to say, first of all, we'd like to thank CHF and in particular Simone Swale, who we worked with on this research there, and also just to note that this research is still in draft form at this point. So the basic question we were looking at was regarding young members' involvement in the governance of housing co-ops. You'll be hearing that phrase a lot. What are the benefits to the cooperatives themselves? What are the benefits to the young members? And what are the means of promoting that involvement? Oops, sorry. Part of the rationale from this is supported by ICA's recent Blueprint for a Cooperative Decade. Of their 5 pillars, 2 of them specifically mention young members. In particular, I showed an excerpt from the participation pillar, where they ask us to think about whether the older conventional ways of engaging young folks are still working. CHF themselves, a couple of years ago, commissioned a report from the Students Commission to help them develop a young member engagement strategy. And there they find that of the co-ops that did respond to their surveys there, about a third had one person under the age of 30 on the board, and another third had more than one. So in terms of what the literature says about this, volunteering among young people generally, not just in cooperatives, we find that there are a lot of personal circumstances that can deter people from getting involved, and especially when we consider that these are obligations that are relatively new to folks, and they're still building capacities to handle, being parents and or students and or workers at the same time. So partly for that reason, literature also finds that younger folks are more self-oriented in their choice of volunteering rather than purely altruistic. And we'll, of course, get into what some of that self-orientation might entail. Namely, the benefits of volunteering, specifically in co-op governance, anyhow, were found to be certainly learning in self-governance skills, mutual governance, you might say also, management skills, technical, techniques of management, the broader context of social housing to policy, and then also, as Catherine said, self-confidence. That certainly came up. And then as far as how to promote volunteerism in cooperative governance, the literature tells us that or suggests that it can be useful to foster social and educational activities as part of creating a vibrant cooperative culture generally. And then sort of what comes out of that is this emergent volunteerism that maybe isn't pre-formalized or necessarily mandated in every respect, but it emerges when the culture as a whole is healthier. And then specifically for getting younger folks involved, again, we want to be able to leverage opportunities and present opportunities to them that show some benefit to their own personal and professional development. So the method for this study was that CHF referred us to various co-ops that had were known to them to have young members on the board. Usually, in all but one case, that was through a staff person, and the staff person referred us on to other folks within the organization to talk to, not just young people, but also older people, meaning over 30. Which I am one now too, in case you're wondering. We did semi-structured interviews based on questions that we had set up beforehand, but then allowed ourselves to stray a bit from them or add on other comments. And we had 6 housing co-ops comprising 4 staff, 7 members under 30, and 7 members over 30. So a good spread among those 3 positionalities. And as far as the findings, first of all, it was pretty consistent that having young members on the board was indeed important. They contributed fresh ideas around social media, using Facebook to both engage existing members and do recruitment, but also things like just emphasizing landscaping or hosting potlucks. So not necessarily everything is digital contributions. It was found that continuity was a strong reason for wanting young members to be on board. And there was also a sense that young members who got involved in the board could take pride in the community and were invested emotionally in it a little bit more. As far as how to do that, people talked about promoting activities for folks that were younger than 18. So the Cooperative Youth Leadership Camp was cited a lot. Also after-school homework study programs, things like that. Time and time again, people mentioned the importance of face-to-face personal appeals in getting people on the board. And we found very little targeted policy around this in a formal sense. There was one cooperative that actually had quotas for youth, which actually 4 out of 9 board members needed to be young members. But besides that, there was no formal policy set up. The benefits that the young members reported and that older members reported observing of them, this is pretty congruent to, I'd say, to what Catherine just described in her own, her prior research we just discussed. So interpersonal skills, technical skills, financial, by technical I mean financial and bookkeeping, and then larger context of how housing works and social housing works in Canada, and policy challenges that are coming up. Employability, being able to build up those CVs, yeah, definitely. Again, self-confidence, not just in what you feel you might be able to say and get away with in a meeting, but also confidence that comes from actually being able to see changes come as a result of your advocacy. And then lastly, community ties were strengthened. So we had one case where folks were in need of cat sitters. It's actually, it was a significant issue for them. And after getting involved in governance, they were connected to the co-op such that they actually found cat sitters and were able to cat sit for other people. So that indicates a broader engagement. So Emily, here's you were asking about for barriers to engagement. So for one thing, each cooperative is definitely different. And again, the culture of that co-op is going to it's going to have a big influence on how anyone gets engaged in governance, not least younger people. So if there's not a healthy governance, or if there's not a healthy culture in general of conviviality in the co-op, if there's not a healthy culture or perceived as healthy culture on the board, that's going to really inhibit people from coming in, we found. Personal circumstances, again, make a big difference. So single moms and or university students sometimes have barriers to participating. And there's also an initial lack of confidence that prevents sort of a self-imposed barrier, you might say, that people don't, really get to engage in governance of very many institutions in their daily lives usually. So this is something that requires a bit of a leap of faith, perhaps, or having others show faith in you to overcome. So in keeping with that, part of the advice for fostering this engagement is that older members and staff and younger members who are already engaged should ask them, should ask the other young members who are not yet engaged to get involved. And that they can start doing this from before even necessarily when those members, when those residents are actually even members. So you can approach, children and say, hey, do you want to get involved in this newsletter or on the Facebook group or whatever else, and then to be persistent in approaching them. And then we were also admonished not to make sure not to approach those folks as sort of in a tokenistic kind of way, but actually to be aware of the particular contributions that they can make as individuals, and possibly also the contributions they could make that would be relevant to their youth. In terms of discussion, comparing what we found to the literature, the learning outcomes look quite similar and were quite confirmed. We also found, enhanced social connections, as described with the cat sitting anecdote. And again, that this phenomenon is part of a broader culture of engagement within the co-op. Part of which is to say that everyone has a role to play in engaging young members. So older members can certainly be open to young members coming in, not assuming that they can't learn, that they're ignorant. Not that necessarily was happening as we saw it, but they can stay open. Younger members can function as sort of peer models. Staff can invite people in to keep them apprised of opportunities to get engaged, and again, to go to those youth leadership camps and such. So thanks very much, and I apologize if your retina are burning right now. The colors came adjusted on this presentation a little bit sharper than I was hoping.
Great, thank you, Justin. That's very interesting. And
Any questions?
Amitava, I've unmuted you. Thanks. Amitava, you are...
Yeah, just very interesting. Just yeah, can you? I'm okay.
You're loud and clear.
Hello. Okay, thank you. Just thank you for your presentation. And one thing I was trying to understand, trying to comprehend, is that there are many things in life which any person will need, and they are touched by cooperatives. Means that a food cooperative is there, there are other cooperatives are there, the transport cooperatives are there, and the credit cooperatives are there. Is it possible to do some action research, integrating all, and then seeing how the young members get into it, and the cooperative movement as such gets integrated and moves forward?
If I understand your question, is there a possibility of designing an action research project, or has an action research project been done that assesses and explores how youth are engaged across cooperative sectors?
Yes.
Okay. And not to my knowledge. I know that the International Cooperative Alliance certainly has been moving on looking at young member engagement, and it's on their agenda. They have a youth committee that's I've heard is pretty active, but I don't have any personal experience assessing that.
If I may add, this is Catherine here. I know that one of the Cura research projects was looking at I believe it was best practices around cooperative education, looking at co-ops in different sectors in Canada. I'm not sure if Catherine or Brendan can speak to that at all, because that was a project that Erin Hancock was involved with. Erin is no longer with CMC. So did that address at all youth engagement in different sectors?
This is Catherine speaking. I know that their paper just came out in draft form, and I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, and I didn't hear the webinar, but the focus was really on looking at co-ops across the board and what sort of educational opportunities they provided, more I think than the impact of those opportunities on individuals. I don't know, Brendan, if you can speak further to that, or Justin.
I'm not actually aware of that particular research. We're just in the process of gathering all the various research channels together, but I'm making notes as we're talking here, and perhaps there's an opportunity to follow up.
I think it's a really good question, though, Amitava. Broadening this research out, I think, is really important. I mean, perhaps the individual, Doug from Federated, could speak to this. Surely involving youth is an issue in the members of Federated, the member organizations in Federated. Certainly in Atlantic Canada, involving young people is an issue in the credit union system. So I agree that it would be important to do a research project that looks across sectors. Maybe Justin can do his PhD on that.
Thank you, Amitava. I'm going to unmute Eric, who has his hand up right at the moment. So, Eric, you're presently live.
Thanks again. Okay. I want to follow up Amitava's question along with my question that I asked earlier, Catherine. One of the things that I'm really concerned about with regard to education is not just participation, but the opportunity for new blood to come in and innovate the cooperative movement, whether or not that's a housing co-op that sees it's doing things differently, or whether or not it's a member of a housing co-op that's a young person, and then gets that well, let's call it entrepreneurial for co-ops, that type of excitement to say, oh, I can do that and I can do it by forming a co-op. That's the type of education that I'm wondering about, whether or not I didn't see in the questions that you asked, Justin, that was a focus. And it does follow up what Amitabha said about, because that's the critical piece. I think we can engage young people just to do the same as we've done in the past, which is not going to be able to sustain housing co-op or anything else in the co-op movement. So what's been done around the area of innovation and young people?
Can I start answering that question? Well, so maybe this didn't come out well enough in our findings, so thanks for raising this question. And it's true, in this research project, we did not ask how are young people innovating in your cooperative organization. But we did ask them how the co-op is benefiting. And so people did talk about young people doing old things in new ways, such as, instead of having a paper newsletter, using a website instead. So I'm not sure if that's, I guess that's technically an innovation, but it's not, a grand innovation. But then there were, some of the young members were also talking about, well, restructuring the maintenance committee, emphasizing landscaping, using social media so that they were being more inclusive, so that more people in the community knew about the housing co-op and their waiting list. So I'm not sure if that's the kind of innovation you're thinking about, but we did hear some of that, and we could do a better job at emphasizing that in the findings. But again, we didn't have a specific research question on that. What is the impact?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I was thinking bigger innovations than those. As you might imagine, that's those can be patronized by people of my age very easily, and just say, well, you've done a great job and you've improved our newsletter, but you're still maintaining the same organization. We haven't created any new co-ops. That's the type of innovation that I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
If
I may ask, this is Catherine with a K speaking. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
All right, I'll go. I can't speak in terms of the research here, but just like from my personal experience, especially back in California, people are innovating in housing in a lot of different ways. I'll just point out younger folks that actually are not quite inside of the co-op model. I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad, but you can go to collaborativehousing.com and you can see a business that's setting up in any number of articles, around like San Francisco Bay Area or Brooklyn or these sort of traditional hipster enclaves, and you can find there's lots and lots of houses that are not cooperatively owned, are not structured as cooperatives, but where people are sharing food and resources and time, and rent's low, and they're performing a lot of the same functions that we associate with group equity / zero equity co-ops in the States and the U.S. So I don't know what you want to make of that, but that activity is happening just outside of the co-op world, I would say still.
Eric, did you want to follow that up, or we'll let Catherine continue with her question? I'll let you put your hand up to indicate if you can.
Let Catherine go.
Yes, maybe, Eric, I just wanted to clarify, and I just sent it out by chat, but your question was, how can we use more innovative methods to get young people into co-ops and excited about co-ops, or once they're in the co-op, how can we facilitate them, taking their big innovative ideas and running with them?
it's the latter. It's valuable to get youth and involved in co-ops as they exist now. But I think one of the things that we've learned from the co-op movement, and I'm thinking of the Antigonish movement particularly, is that without innovation, as any business, we become stagnant and we just do things the way that we used to, that served a purpose of 30 or 50 or 60 years ago, and it's not meeting our needs now. That's the type of innovation that any business needs to do, and cooperatives are a business, and we need to encourage that type of innovation in our young people and for ourselves, and really uphold that and push that, and say, go out there and try something different, and we'll support you in that effort. That's the type of innovation I'm talking about.
That's a great question, Eric.
We're coming close to the end of our hour together.
And I don't have a response to that.
And it is a much larger question that Eric is posing then, and much of the other research would dovetail, I think, to reflect those concerns. I'm actually working with the emerging cooperators in Canada, who are a young group who are looking at actively looking at how to do that, and how to get younger people involved, particularly in governance. And so I think we're going to see a lot of active efforts in that. I don't know of any research per se, but I think there's actually a movement afoot with the blueprint now out in the world to make this to make an effort to have more participation from young members. Amitabh's got his hand up, and perhaps we'll give him the last question, if that's okay. Amitabh, you're live, but I think you've muted yourself.
Okay. Is okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me, please?
Yeah. Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Just a comment. Cooperative movement is basically it should be an organic and a moving thing. And there are many things with the young people, because a cooperative basically is a way of life. And in every sphere of life, we need cooperation, and we are doing cooperation. It needs to be an organic and dynamic movement as such. Somehow or other, I see the cooperative movement in Canada is getting stagnated in terms of only functioning, and the basic movement part is getting lost in the institutional setup. This is my observation. I just wanted to know your opinion about it.
Just speaking for myself, I've only had the privilege of being in Canada and getting to learn about its cooperative sector really for the last 2 years. So I couldn't comment on the situation here really.
I would say, and Eric Toos King might disagree with me or have something else to share, but we're in Cape Breton here. Cape Breton University is, just a couple of kilometers down the highway was where the first credit union here was incorporated, the first housing co-op incorporated. It was actually a building co-op, not a continuing co-op, but really this is where the Antigonish movement happened, and there's very little left of the co-op sector, but our credit unions are doing very well, and there are people who are involved in a music co-op. There are co-ops here, but as far as the movement dimension that you've asked about, well, no, I don't see a movement dimension. So, for example, I don't see co-ops here in Cape Breton working together at all. So the credit unions are networked, but the credit unions aren't working with the co-ops in the arts and culture sector. Or in the food sector. So indeed, I don't think there is much of a movement dimension to cooperatives in Cape Breton.
Catherine, I agree. That's the reason for my question. The other piece that I would say is that there are places within the co-op movement internationally that are very dynamic, and I think we need to just lift those up. I just finished attending the Canadian Workers Co-operative Federation meeting that was in Wolfville this last couple of weeks ago, and that's one of the places. The worker co-ops around the world is another one, the whole CICOPA network. There's parts of the world that are very dynamic in that. One of the other places in Canada, it's a strange one, but I am very much encouraged by it, is the Co-operators Insurance. They gather people together and form they perform some function somewhat like the Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada does, bringing together cooperatives, only 40-some that are members, owners of the cooperative insurance, but they talk about things like indivisible reserves for cooperatives and sustainability and what that means in a full sense of that. Those types of discussions are not happening in many parts of the co-op movement that I'm seeing at this point, and that whole principle, number 6, is really very important at this point, and I am encouraged by the ICA's blueprint. That's the type of movement that I think is going to be dynamic and is that I'm urging and that I think is needed.
I'm going to interject. This is Brendan speaking, because one of my roles in the coming year is going to be actively to promote the actual blueprint in Canada and to try and, in my seat at CMC, to unite the different sectors behind it, educate people, and hopefully get things going as you have indicated you'd like to see, Eric. That's definitely what we're all about and why we've come together as a new organization representing both the Francophone and Anglophones in Canada, and we're working diligently on that. So we are at the end of our hour, and if there's no additional questions, I think the comments have been great. If anyone has any final comments or questions, please put your hand up, and we'll wrap up on that note. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining today and for the real positive discussion. I know we diverted a little bit from the specifics of housing co-ops, but I think that's always healthy to relate it back to other sectors and to the general movement. I will thank you, and I'm going to ask you to come and join us for future events, which will be posted on the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network. There'll be 3 additional webinars announced soon, and we'll be looking forward to